Recently, the Jamaica Society for the Blind hosted its Emancipation Forum. Our guest speaker on the day was Mr. Stephen Golding, the president of the Kingston chapter of the UNIA. His presentation was on the remnants of slavery in our society. We now hand over to Mr. Shavin Daly for the introduction.
The person that will be speaking with us today is the president of the Kingston division of the UNIA, and he's none other than Mr. Stephen Golding. A lot of persons may know him from broadcasting and other means. And the UNIA was started back in 1914 by the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. And, it started here in Jamaica. Then he moved it to Harlem. While at Harlem, it expanded. And by 1920, they have over 1,000 divisions all over the United States and in the Caribbean. And Mr. Stephen Golding is here today to speak to us about the remnants of slavery that still exist in our culture today. Good day, Mr. Stephen Golding. Welcome to JSB family and welcome to our Emancipation Forum.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, sir. And let me also thank the Society for the Blind for the invitation to address you all. Let me say good afternoon to your members. Good afternoon to those of you joining us. My name is Stephen Golding, as was said. I am the president of the Kingston Division of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. That's the first division of the great global Pan-African organization founded by our first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And as we move into the month of August next week, which we call the month of Mosiah, is normally the time of year where we give a lot of reflection on Marcus, on Garvey, on Garveyism and the philosophy that he taught, something that we have been bantering about teaching our children, but still have not put our full 100% into that as yet. It's something that I am passionate about and have been pursuing for the last 15 years of my life. We teach Garveyism at the Heidel University College in St. Catherine, because we believe that if we're going to teach Garveyism in Jamaica, it will have to begin by us teaching our teachers. Teachers cannot teach something they themselves have never learned. And as much as we talk about Garvey and his philosophy in the month of August, what I would like to share with you today is the importance of reflecting on Garveyism and living Garveyism every day of our lives, particularly as people of African descent. This nation is almost 95% of African descent. We are a Black nation. We are a nation made up of Africans, whether we want to recognize it or not. And as we speak today in recognition of the anniversary of our emancipation by the British Parliament, and it's important as much as we celebrate August 1st, as that day in 1834, when it was legislated that the institution of slavery perpetrated on this island, both by the British since 1611 and by the Spanish before that since 1494. As much as we reflect on that as a historical day in our development as a people, in our cultural journey as a people in this hemisphere, and particular to this island, we must distinguish between emancipation and liberation. Jamaica, as other British colonies, were emancipated by an act of parliament, a deliberation between British white men, if I dare say so. A vote was taken, compensation was paid to the so-called owners of slaves who carried out the greatest crime against humanity that we know today as chattel slavery, which was invented during the transatlantic slave trade. As much as we reflect on that history, we should also solemnly and deeply consider the fact that no piece of paper, no act of any parliament anywhere should be allowed to govern the natural human rights of our brothers and sisters across this globe. Our closest neighbor, Haiti, 90 miles to the east of us, is a country that liberated itself from slavery. They do not celebrate an Emancipation Day. They did not wait patiently for the French government to sign a piece of paper, but they understood their inalienable rights as human beings to freedom and extracted and exacted that freedom where it was denied them, shedding blood for the ultimate liberation of their country, and became the first Black Republic in the Western Hemisphere in 1804, 30 years before our own emancipation was granted. And in fact, that act and that event of history, the Declaration of the Independence of Haiti, or IT, in the early 19th century, at the beginning of the 19th century, was really what put the final fuel on the fire that led to the emancipation of Africans by the British and eventually by the Portuguese in Brazil and the United States a little before that. This is very important, very important. The difference between emancipation and liberation. And it is because we received an emancipation and not a true liberation that we still battled with the vestiges and the remnants of the institutionalization of slavery for centuries after 1834, and are still battling with it today. Now, this is undeniable. Remnants of slavery exist within every facet of our lives as a society, educationally, culturally, religiously, economically, industrially, politically. In fact, the philosophy of white supremacy was so neatly sewn into the fabric of our society that we sometimes are unaware or gullibly deny that it exists, even when that flies in the face of some of our own actions. Why do our people bleach? Where does the philosophy that a lighter skin tone means higher social advancement come from? As Malcolm X said in one of his famous speeches, who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet? And it is because we fail to recognize these remnants and to address them vigorously and vociferously where necessary. We don't speak to our young children about their African identity. We do not create within their mind that concept that allows them to not only identify with Africa, but want to identify with Africa. We have an educational system that has come down from our colonial masters, from our chattel slave masters, who for 300 years carefully crafted a philosophy consciously and subconsciously in its effect. When we teach our children the nursery rhymes that glorify other races and glorify other cultures, when we teach in the church not to be proud of being Africans because we don't locate and identify the African presence in the Bible and point it out to our children. We teach them that Pharaoh was a bad man who kept Moses and the Jews in bondage. We never stop to tell them that Egypt represents the pinnacle of African civilization at one point on this earth, and the pinnacle, the penultimate pinnacle of the earliest civilizations. That it was the Africans through Egypt and Ethiopia who gave the world art, science, mathematics, astrology. These are facts. That the only great wonders of the ancient world still in existence, such as the Sphinx and the pyramids of Gaza, were built by Africans. We don't emphasize that when we speak about the Bible and speak about Egypt. We don't emphasize that in the school when we speak about African history. In fact, oftentimes we teach our African history from the point of slavery coming forward. So our children are left to believe that their ancestors were brutes brought from Africa out of a Tarzan movie. This is a European narrative. And that they were not the people who built universities in Timbuktu in West Africa that brought scholars from all over the world. When you say the word Timbuktu to a Jamaican child, even to a Jamaican adult, they think that you're talking about some faraway bush, somewhere in the bush where people lost and can't find themselves and going nowhere. They have no idea that it represented the university city of Mali that was ruled by the Mansas, emperors of Mali, such as Mansa Musa, who was declared the richest man on earth ever. He was a black man, an African man, who when he traveled from West Africa to Mecca, spent so much gold that the price of gold dropped for 10 years, and it was actually that brought the attention of Africa to the Europeans. We don't teach that. Before he came to the throne, Mali was ruled by Abu Bakr II, who abdicated the throne to cross the Atlantic with 200 ships 200 years before Columbus did. And that is why the reason why we have statues with African features on the South American continent. They call them the Olmecs and say they were an ancient civilization. No, they were Africans who crossed the Atlantic before Europe. We do not teach our children these things. We don't teach them that the melanin that causes their skin to be darker in hue than other races is valued today more than the price of gold, chemically. If they understood this, then how could they bleach their skin? How could they be ashamed of their kinky hair? Marcus Garvey said the black skin is not a badge of, it's not for us not to be ashamed of our black skin, but understand it represents a badge of honor. It identifies us as a member of the oldest branch of the human family. Even the scientists in China who sought to prove that life began in China at the end of their 10-year research had to accept that even the Chinese people originate from Africa. Marcus Garvey said in 1937 that we are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. For whilst others have freed our bodies, none but ourselves can free our minds. 43 years later, Robert Nesta Marley, our own king of reggae, put it to music in a song he titled Redemption Song. But those lines are so important. And when we speak about the remnants of slavery in our society today, the most rooted vestiges of it are within our own minds. The mentality of our people, our perception of ourselves as Africans. And this is why even 100 years after Marcus Garvey formed the UNIA and became a Black icon across the world and was lifted up by Black people everywhere because he spoke out about these truths. And he urged his race towards a greater emancipation, towards an ultimate liberation. He urged us to be unified as we faced a common threat, not only as Jamaicans or Trinidadians or African Americans, but as Black people right across the globe. And his message to us was to invest in ourselves, to invest in our ancestors, to build up an empire on the continent of Africa that would be strong enough to lend its protection to its people wherever they were in the world. And it is a philosophy that cannot be disputed. Even as we've seen since the time of Marcus Garvey, a century later, as the world moves towards a greater globalization, towards greater collective security, everyone grouping up to secure scarce benefits and scarce resources. Yet the people who are descendant from the richest continent on the earth remain scattered and divided, whether by nationality, religion, class, politics. They put so many things above and beyond race and beyond the fact that as a people, we share a common history. And as Pan-Africanists, we believe in a common destiny. So as we reflect on this soon-to-be eve of the 100, I believe, and 70, is it 70? No, 186th anniversary of our emancipation. There are some hard truths that we have to grapple with going forward. Because not only is it important that we recognize the remnants of slavery in our society, but we also face the fact that one of the greatest remnants is the fact that slavery in itself represented also a 300+ year war against our ancestors, against the African continent, against the African people. And it is a war that we fought from the beginning to the end, and that we must not be fooled to believe is over until we finish it. What do I mean by that? I'm speaking of resistance to slavery. I'm speaking of the Quilombos of Brazil, the Palenques of Colombia. I'm speaking of people like Gaspar Yanga in Mexico. I'm speaking of people like King Miguel in Ecuador, Bencos Biojo in Colombia, Macandal in Haiti, and of course, Nani, Kojo, Achompong, Kwao, Tachi, Koba, and so many of the freedom fighters in Jamaica who resisted slavery, both on the continent of Africa, as well as in the bowels of the ships, to the ports that they arrived in, to the plantations that they burnt, to the mountains and the hills that they took refuge in, as they fought for liberation, not emancipation. They were met with treaty here and in other parts of the Western Hemisphere, establishing the first African kingdoms. Treaties were signed, land titles were given, but yet the fight continued. It continued with the women who poisoned some of the masters, those who ran espionage to those who were able to buy themselves out of slavery, those who made it to the streets of London and challenged slavery in the courts, people like John Somerset, otherwise known as Cogoano, people like Aluado Equiano, who was the man to bring it to the attention of people like William Wilberforce and Mr. Sharp, Granville Sharp, and others, who are now famous for being the emancipation lobbyists and those who won emancipation for the African. When we make little mention of people like Equiano, Cogoano, Ignatius Sancho, Africans who were on the streets of London in the late 18th century, a group of them known as the Sons of Africa, who became the first Black lobby group, who lobbied these politicians to push for emancipation. And it wasn't a quick fight. Oluwado Equiano died a little into the 1790s, before the abolition of the slave trade in 1807, which preceded the abolition of slavery in 1834. But it was his work, his lobbying, his autobiography of the horrors of slavery that were used by the British Parliament. But yet the names of these ancestors are forgotten by the historians and not taught to our children. So they believe that emancipation was given to them by the white man who looked similar to the Jesus Christ on the walls of the churches that they attend. We fought, we lobbied, we received emancipation. But at the time that we received emancipation, we were also hoodwinked, tricked, bamboozled. In the case of Jamaica, in 1834, it was legislated that compensation should be paid to the slave owners in the amount of 47 million pounds. 21 million to be paid in cash, 26 million to be calculated in labor. That labor came up to 4 years. And it is the reason why, though we heard of emancipation in 1834, we were told that we had to stay on the plantation for 4 more years as apprentices. We became apprentices after doing the job for 300 years. For the last 4 years of doing it for free, we were told it was so we could learn to do it. Ridiculous. We had been doing it for 300 years. We had been doing it because others couldn't do it. The 21 million cash that was paid out, the British government had to take out a loan to meet that payment. In 2015, the British Treasury tweeted and sent out on social media that that loan taken out to pay the 21 million in cash, that loan had just been repaid by the British people in 2015. To add insult to injury, another slap in the face. So emancipation wasn't granted out of any grand gesture of humanity and recognizing the human nature of the African and his divine human rights. It was negotiated, and even at the end of that negotiation, the value of the chattel of the slave masters was still the primary point of negotiation. And emancipation wouldn't have come if that 47 million pounds wasn't paid. And that 21 million pounds paid off in 2015 meant that all our ancestors who have crossed the waters from Windrush till now, all of us who have gone to Britain and helped build up its economies and its industries and have been working and paying taxes to raise families there and even send money home to our families here. It is they who provided the monies to make the payment on that loan. So what I'm saying, in fact, is that for our own emancipation, 188 years ago, I believe. Yeah, I think I got that, 87 years ago. For our own emancipation, our own descendants, the descendants of those ancestors, are the ones who had to pay that bill. And we just finished paying it off in 2015. Is this an emancipation? Or is it a ransoming? And so it brings me to my final point, that when we speak of the remnants of slavery, the final and ultimate remnant of slavery falls within the category and issue of reparations. Reparations. Because if we accept emancipation and accept the fact that we had to work for generations to buy our ancestors out of slavery in the past, that we had to buy our freedom. When the United Nations says that slavery is a crime against humanity and that crimes against humanity have no statute of limitation, then when will we receive justice? This is the ultimate remnant of slavery, to finish the fight, for the world to recognize that what was done to our ancestors was the ultimate wrong, the ultimate crime against humanity, and to set right the record and to set right the measures of compensation that come at the end of any war, where there is a victor and there is a loser. And as long as that issue of reparation is not addressed and not taken seriously by us, we will remain the losers, being oppressed by the victors who have tricked us to believe that we were emancipated. We say no to that, and we advance to victory in the fight for liberation with the ultimate cry of reparation now. I thank you.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much, Mr. Golden. We do appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Remember to subscribe, like, and share our content. And stay tuned to more content coming soon to this channel.
This has been a production of the JSB Library.